When Emma and her brother Liam signed the papers for the peeling Victorian on Hollow Bend, it felt like the kind of reckless, hopeful thing that people do when they are desperate to change their lives. They had grown up in cramped rentals, moving every year for jobs that never stuck, and when an old family house, left untouched since their grandmother's funeral, fell into their laps, they took it with a kind of naive hunger that comes from finally being offered a place to belong. The realtor was grim and thin and smiled as if the smile belonged to someone else. "It's lovely," she said quietly, "but it's old. You'll hear things. Don't mind them." Emma laughed when she told Liam on the drive back. "She said the house talks," she said. Liam shrugged and said, "Old houses do that. Creaks, pipes, drafts." They moved in over 2 days, carrying boxes up a narrow staircase, dust blooming in the shaft of late afternoon light, and the first week was the gentle kind of busy that makes a place begin to feel like yours. They painted, they stacked books in a library that smelled of mildew and lemon oil, they found a sealed tin of their grandmother's jewelry and a photograph of 2 young women laughing on a beach. The house was full of oddities, a pantry with an extra shelf hidden behind a false back, a door at the top of the stairs that opened onto plaster, and a narrow, windowless room on the main floor that smelled faintly, strangely, of burnt sugar. The first time Emma heard the whisper, it was late and small, barely more than the way a throat clears. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor of her bedroom, sorting linens, when the sound grazed her ear like someone saying her name from another room. "Emma," it breathed, soft enough that she might have imagined it. She froze and listened. The house offered only the low comforting buzzing of the refrigerator and the pulse of the street lamp outside. She told herself it was the house settling or her mind trying to make sense of quiet. That night she slept fitfully, worrying it away like a catch in the back of her throat. The next morning she pulled back the pillow and found a square of yellowed paper folded into a neat triangle. The handwriting was thin and tremulous. "You're not welcome here," it said. "E." She felt as if the floor had shifted. "Who is E?" she asked, showing it to Liam. He thumbed the paper, made a joke about teenagers, and put it on top of a stack of mail. But the joke didn't stick. Later that day, when she went into the bathroom, she found another message fogged onto the mirror as if someone had breathed onto the glass. "They're watching you sleep," it read. From there the small things multiplied until the house felt crowded with them. Temperatures plummeted in a room at a time, making breath white in the air though it was late May. Doors she knew she had shut were found slightly ajar. Shadows pooled in corners like spills that never soaked up. The whispering increased, not bright, vocal speech, but a background of rustled consonants and wet syllables that tugged at the edge of sense. They called her name sometimes they hummed as if testing a throat. Once, while she was making coffee, the radio switched itself on to a static hiss that resolved into a low childlike voice singing a lullaby she'd heard as a child and never liked. Liam, who had been practical and able to laugh at the first month's oddities, began to change after he admitted he'd seen a woman in the hall at night, just standing, face downcast, hands folded over her stomach like someone pretending to wait. When he moved toward her she dissolved like dust. "She was wearing Grandma's shawl," he said in the morning. "I could swear it." They found another note behind a cookbook, then one stuck in the old library between a French play and a book of hymns. "The door is open." They began to search. In the small windowless room that smelled of burnt sugar, Emma found the tall mirror, its silver blackened with age. The frame was carved with twisting vines, the kind of craftwork that once made someone proud and then was carried into oblivion. When she moved the mirror to check the wall behind it, her fingertips brushed a seam in the drywall she hadn't noticed before. At the seam a rusted hinge peered out. Behind the mirror, a narrow door was recessed, its paint flaking around the edges as if it had resisted opening for decades. Her hands were shaking as she pulled. The door unlatched with a sound like a dry laugh and opened onto a stone tunnel that ran down into cold damp, its mouth smelling of old earth and the salt of tears. There was a small wooden chair at the foot of the first set of steps and, on the chair, an old journal bound in cracked leather. Emma read the journal in the long wash of next afternoon's sun. The handwriting was their grandmother's, careful loops and long tails, and the entries tracked something that began like ordinary loneliness and ended with a fear that tasted like iron. "I found the voice in the walls," one entry said. "It calls out at night and sometimes it calls me by name. I tried to stop listening. It said it was hungry, it promised me company if I opened the door." Dates were clustered in a few months of a single terrible winter. "I locked the door, too afraid to go down again." She ended the last entry with a line Emma read over twice: "If you ever find this, burn it and pretend you never came here." There was no denying the journal's implication. And yet even in the light of day the house pressed closer, like a living thing aware the lock was failing. At night, the whispers came in voices that sometimes thinned into their grandmother's speech patterns and other times sounded like 1,000 trapped insects. The notes, now more frequent, began to include small hand-drawn marks that looked like doors and windows and locks with lines through them. Emma tried vigilance. She put a padlock on the hidden door and wrapped chain around it. The chain warmed to the touch as if a hand was breathing on it. Liam brought an old baseball bat down to the hidden room and kept it near. They slept in the same room for 3 nights, sharing the same space like 2 people camping in a landscape they did not trust. On the 3rd night, the house did something they had not yet believed it could do. It answered back. At roughly 3 in the morning, the temperature dropped through them like water. The house's static murmuring condensed into coherent speech. Emma awoke to a breath on her neck and the ghost of a syllable. "Emma," it said, soft and sure, the kind of calling that made your name feel like an accusation. She sat up and saw nothing but the moon through the bay window and dust motes that shimmered like pale fish. The whisper came again, closer, and upstairs, Liam swore he heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, like someone climbing the stairs to check whether they were still there. He reached for the light and the hall bulb stuttered 3 times and gave out. In the dark, the house drew itself in like lungs and then exhaled a voice, "Liam." It sounded like their grandmother. Liam unlatched the chain on the hidden door against his better judgment, propelled by a mix of fear and the tenderness of filial curiosity. They moved together with flashlights that cast lances through the tunnel's blackness. The stone was slick with a smell like old milk gone sour. The tunnel rounded, descended, and opened into a low, vaulted room where water had once stood. In the center of the floor sat a wooden chair nailed to the boards. Wet footprints circled the chair, then stopped. When Emma set the flashlight on the journal again, they both felt a pressure in the air, like a weight whose purpose was to stand between them and clarity. And then a figure moved in the mouth of the tunnel. It was tall and lithe, and at first Emma thought it was a trick of shadow. Then it stepped into the beam, and the thing's hair, long and black, fell in a curtain over where a face should have been. When it tilted its head, there was their grandmother's profile behind that screen of hair, the small hooked nose, the mole near the left eye, the lips that used to trace knitted stitches across laps. But the eyes were not eyes anymore. They were pools of depthless black, and when it smiled the mouth widened in a grin that did not know the shape of the human jaw. "You opened it," the voice said, and the voice was in their ears in a chorus, 1, 2, 3, like someone duplicating their words with a delay. "You let us out." Emma moved backward. Her hands found the journal, and in the dim the words on the page seemed to writhe. "You are not welcome here," she said aloud, feeling the ridiculousness of the sentence in a room full of impossible things. The thing laughed, and the laugh was paper-thin and wet. It spoke then, slower, and its mouth formed words that tasted like copper. "Welcome," it said. "We've been hungry for new voices." Liam swung the baseball bat. The bat went through the thing as if through steam. That was the moment both siblings understood. Whatever wore their grandmother's face was not bound by flesh. It had the habit of language and the familiarity of memory, but it could not be rearranged by force. As they turned to run, the house became obstinate. Doors that had been open a minute before were suddenly shut when they reached them. Halls lengthened into corridors they had never seen. The floor flexed underfoot. Behind them, in the hidden room, hundreds of thin threads of candlelight winked on and spread through the stone, and with them came a chorus of voices, old women and small children, men laughing wrong, and the sound of a lullaby gone sour. The voices rose and layered until speech itself felt thick and impossible. They ran until the front door thundered shut of its own accord, and they were forced into the yard. The night air had never felt so honest and cold. The house watched them from the lawn, its windows like dark eyes reflecting the moving lights of the street. They did not stop until they reached the main road, breath-heaving, hair clinging to the back of their necks. When they looked back once, from a distance that should have offered safety, the front door creaked open and something stepped out. They didn't see it clearly, just a suggestion of movement and the ripple of a silhouette, but they knew in the sick animal part of themselves that what left the house was not a person and would not stop until it had practiced the new art of being in the world they occupied. For weeks the house sat empty. Emma and Liam stayed with friends, then with a rental company that offered them a cabin by a lake where the sound of water might feel purifying. They took the journal with them and read the entries aloud, trying to catch a pattern, a spell, anything that might undo what had been done. There was no word like that in the careful looping handwriting, only records of a woman listening and the terrible consequence of her listening. They spoke to a parish priest who listened with a face drained of color and told them, in a voice made of old books, to burn the journal and never sell the house. Sell it and the house will keep moving. They hired a real estate attorney who said in contractual tones that property must change hands and the law did not care for hauntings. The house went on the market. When a young couple with bright eyes and a 401k and too much optimism signed the papers and moved in, Emma and Liam thought they had done the best they could: warn, then step away. They left a terse note beneath the floorboards near the baseboard in the living room. You cannot burn what is already inside, too frightened to write more. They wanted to be done. And yet one night, as Emma dreamed of something soft and white and distant, she woke to the smell of toast. At first she laughed at the absurdity. Their friends insisted she had simply carried a smell with her. The truth arrived as a small folded note tucked beneath her pillow when the morning came. It was the same brittle paper, the same thin, trembling hand. "You're not welcome here," it read. Emma pressed the paper to her mouth and tasted dust in the fibers. The sound of a child humming drifted up through the vents, a tune their grandmother used to hum when she peeled apples. They called the new owners to warn them. The young man, Tom, heard them and tried to reassure with the casual braggadocio of someone who had read too many renovation blogs. "Old houses have quirks," he told them, laughing as if that laugh could stitch history back into harmless. They sent him the journal pages photographed and clipped, and though he promised to read them, he never called back. In the weeks that followed, the couple left as abruptly as someone fleeing a party that turns into an argument. Packed bags, a hurried line of headlights down an alleyway, and in their wake the house stood silent, breathing the kind of breath that smelled faintly of burnt sugar. Emma dreamed herself back into the narrow tunnel and felt the tug of a wall that wanted her to press a palm to it. At times she was so sure she could hear the house saying her name that she would stop walking on a crowded street and fold into herself until the sound receded. She took to writing down everything she heard as if transcription might be a talisman. Friends told her to stop. Stop thinking about it, stop visiting the property, stop inviting it into speech. But the human habit of narrative is stubborn. She wanted to tell the story to someone who would listen. Months later, curiosity and something colder, an urge like the gravity of a black rock, pulled Liam back into the yard for one last look. He wanted proof they had been right, or wrong, or something that might be nailed down with bolts and chalk. He peered in through a window and saw the dining room table set for two, as if someone expected company. On the table there was a single folded piece of paper near the place where their grandmother used to sit when she was alive and crocheting. Liam eased the door with gloved hands. It moved without complaint. On the paper, in a hand grown thinner and more certain with age, was the single word he had used for them the first night: welcome. When Emma saw it, she tasted iron and thought she would be sick. She imagined the house filling with people who had been swallowed before and who kept being called into more mouths, more throats, like a kind of contagious grammar. She imagined a world in which the house would not be the only thing to learn how to speak. That was the last safe thought she let herself have before the house learned how to carry its voices beyond its walls. A real estate sign went up across the street. New people moved in after the summer. Some left as pale as ghosts. Some never left. The whispering never stopped, partly because the house never really needed to stop. Sound is a cheap thing to keep making when you can feed it hope, and hope is an easy prey for a place that knows how to call someone by name. The last entry in the journal, discovered months later in a crack beneath the mantel by a neighbor who liked pruning dead roses, had been written in a different hand, sudden, cramped, desperate. "Don't answer it," it said. "Don't look where it points. Don't open the small door beneath the mirror." But like all desperate notes, it felt too late. The house already had a voice in every room, and sometimes when Emma woke in the night, the floorboards would thrum with the cadence of a hand on a table as if someone inside was counting out on their knuckles. 1, 2, 3. Sometimes the counting continued into the street and down the block until whole houses hummed in sympathy. There was a logic to it now, a hunger made tidy and efficient. It wanted mouths. One evening in late October, when the wind made the old linden trees scrape their branches like fingernails, Emma stood with a packed bag in the dusty glow of the front porch and thought she might throw the journal into the street, into a gutter of leaves, into anything that might make it stop. She had rehearsed 1,000 goodbyes. She had written letters she never sent. But at the last second she turned and put the journal back into the hidden door's hollow, not knowing why. She pressed the cover down until it sat flush with the wood and left the door latched. As she closed the front gate, the house sighed, not a creak or a groan but a deep contented breath that rose out of cracked mortar and sighed up through the chimney. It was the sound of satisfaction. Emma walked away with Liam in silence. They both felt it like a shadow at the knees. That night, as they lay in a motel that smelled of bleach and synthetic lemon, Emma felt the bed shiver beneath her as if something had just walked across it and paused to look out the window. She rolled over and found a note tucked into the blanket. It was small and familiar. "You're not welcome here," it read. Emma's hand closed around the paper until her knuckles went white. She slid out of bed and walked to the window. In the room below, A light blinked on in the Victorian's topmost window. For a long moment there was nothing. Then the curtain twitched, and the figure of an old woman, small, bent, and impossible, stood inside the glass. She lifted a hand, and Emma felt the word "come" move through the air between them like a cold finger. Emma shut the curtains and laughed once, a thin sound she didn't mean to make. Laughing felt more honest than the alternative. But there was a knock on the motel door at midnight. Liam, who had dozed off on the far side of the bed, sat up with a bat in his hands. They went to the door together but looked through the peephole and saw nothing but the empty corridor and the faded carpet. When they opened the door, there was a single scrap of yellowed paper on the mat. No footprints led to it. No one had been there. The scrap read the same thing they had read before. "You're not welcome here. E. Sometimes the mind wants to make of a thing a simple moral. The house is bad, houses are full of memory, memory is dangerous. Sometimes the mind wants to call it a lesson. Don't go looking into closed places." But the truth sits stranger and quieter. The house at Hollow Bend had been listening for years, and it had learned how to ask for company. The world is large and generous and full of empty rooms just waiting to echo back. The house would keep trying, in small notes and broken mirrors and voices you thought were someone you loved, and every time a person answered, it would add another voice to the chorus. And sometimes, when the wind is right and the street lamps are low, if you walk past Hollow Bend, you can hear it counting softly, the way someone counts before they begin, 1, 2, 3.